and then talk about Microsoft 365 and what's included. And then we will do a demo on Windows 10 E3 and E5 CSP upgrade rights. And then, this should be on the top, we're also going to record this meeting so that we can view it again later. If anybody has a problem with being recorded, please drop off the meeting now. Next slide. All right. Yeah, I don't want to talk about ourselves too much, but Giga-Green, we're a gold cloud productivity partners, and we also have silver competencies in EMS, Windows and devices, and the small to mid-size business competency. We're a Microsoft authorized education reseller, and we're also a CSP direct partner. Perfect. And so here's just a pretty high-level outline of all the stuff that we do. Our bread and butter is consulting and deploying Microsoft software, so Office 365 implementations, Azure, as well as SharePoint and System Center. So, yep, and we also host websites and provide managed services. Some specialty areas where we have our Microsoft practice development, as well as technical training for IT professionals. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to Will to do the webinar portion, starting with what's in Microsoft 365. So Will, take it away.
Thanks, Jared. Just going to get dived right in here to M365 and what it is. So it's Microsoft's complete offering. There are a few things that aren't included in it when it comes to cloud solutions, but for the most part, if you're going to purchase Microsoft cloud solutions, everything's going to be included in this bundle, especially if you go to the M365 E5 portion. The end goal is to build a modern workplace utilizing this product suite, which we'll kind of talk about after a bit here of what a modern workplace actually is. The end goal is you're always going to increase your productivity, security, and you can really do that if you're in a singular platform because you're not sharing data across different cloud providers, and you can really lock things down if you need to on the security aspect. Plus, the other great part is that if you don't need everything, you don't need to purchase everything. You can purchase as a la carte and then add things as you get there, and eventually you'll probably find yourself just purchasing M365 as the best offering just because you've put so many things together. And then there's a pretty good ROI tool that I found. It's always hard to determine productivity ROI, so you always want to take a look at what M365 can do for your organization specifically. So this tool kind of helps you put in some numbers and analytics about your company, and then helps you determine what you can see out of it in the end. But that doesn't really talk about what is included in M365 at all. Basically, there's two varieties of it. There's Microsoft E3, M365 E3 and M365 E5. The two variants, the big differences is voice capabilities. If you can see kind of in the middle of this table here, it talks about PST and conferencing and cloud PBX. That's specifically one of the E5 purchases. But so what's all included? Office 365 E3, Windows 10 Enterprise E3, EMS E3, or E5 variant if you purchase the E5 variant, and then all the goodies that come along with it underneath of that. So I mean, there's a lot to digest on this slide here, but essentially you can see what exactly you get with each one of them. Even more detailed than this is what are called the service descriptions. So if you go and take a look at the M365 service descriptions, you'll see specifically what functionality and features you're purchasing and what you can get as part of the bundle. So this is M365 as a whole. Does anybody have any questions about that before we kind of go on and dive into some more of the specific pieces of it? And feel free to ask any questions in the chat or take yourself off mute if you have any questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end, but feel free just to ask as we're going to make sure we get everything clarified and we don't leave any questions hanging. But yeah, moving along here.
Hey, Will, just before you go,
Yeah,
on the previous screen, does AAD P2 imply something above just a basic AAD, for example?
you're talking about under identity and access management?
Two down from that, right there, Azure Active Directory P2.
Yep. So P1 and P2 are slightly different offerings. The P2 is the high end, right? I don't know exactly what comes with it, but a lot of it is based around Azure Information Protection.
Okay.
So if you're needing to kind of rights manage things, AIP is part of P2, or at least part of it, I believe. So you'd have to look at the specific functionality there, but in most cases, P1 handles a lot of what you need, especially if you're looking at like self-password reset. That's just a P1 functionality.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. All right. So we talked about a modern workplace, right? So right now there's kind of this big drastic change going on in IT across the board, where people are moving away from hosting their own infrastructure and all their own applications to cloud hosted providers, and really kind of outsourcing individual software pieces and their infrastructure even. So you're getting this mix of classic and modern IT, right, where users used to be stuck to a single device and they couldn't go anywhere. All their files were stuck there. If the machine got reimaged, that was if they didn't save it to a file share, they lost all their stuff and they had to pretty much start from scratch. Now you're seeing everything kind of move to a central repository in the cloud, and manage devices kind of remotely, and more through a cloud interface versus group policy and things like that. And that's really where you're seeing kind of the modernization of workplaces, right? The idea of a modern workplace, though, isn't to have one or the other. It's to simply coexist between the two of them. So a lot of people are moving to modern IT where they don't have on-prem infrastructure and things like that, which is a very good goal. If you want to get there, it may not be right for your organization. It just depends on your size. But it is definitely possible to, essentially go to a fully cloud managed solution and software hosted angle for your organization. But to do that, you still have to account for all the classic things that you have currently until you can get into the new modern IT scenario. And that's hopefully what Windows 10 and Azure AD is going to help you do to kind of bring things up to speed, but also maintain how you have your environment currently. So this is an old version. Let me get the good one. All right, sorry about that. Had an extra slide. Okay, so what we really want to focus on today is Windows 10 and its portion of CSP. So if you're looking at going from 7 or 8 to Windows 10, you actually have the ability to do that purchasing through Windows 10 CSP. If you purchase Windows 10 Enterprise, that is included in the Microsoft bundle that I was talking about previously, but it's really more the focus thing that I wanted to pick out of the giant package that you could purchase today. So when it comes to upgrading your devices, the free period to go from Windows 7 or 8 has expired. But if you purchase and become a CSP customer, you actually are granted those rights again. To my understanding, there's been a lot of questions about how to actually, make the jump and go from A to B from 7 to 10, or 8 to 10, depending on your environment. A lot of people aren't on 8. But I just wanted to talk about the different choices that you have to do that, and kind of the key management side of it. Seems to be a lot of issues out there about how the OEM keys or the retail keys that you have are actually being transferred in this scenario. Everybody's expecting a brand new Windows 10 key, and that's just not how it works anymore. Like it says here on screen, there's several different ways. We'll be talking mostly about the upgrade and traditional methods. I guess there is no other real methods, but yeah. So to start, the upgrade method is just a straightforward in-place upgrade that Windows does on its own. You run this tool on a Windows 7 machine. It's going to go out, download all the required Windows 7 to 10 files, go ahead and it runs it and installs it in place. In part of the marketing we did for this webcast, we talked about actually showing that and how that works. It's really boring to watch. There's not a lot to talk about. It just goes through a bunch of screens saying it's updating, and then on the other end you have Windows 10. There's a lot of different ways to actually deploy that. The simplest is just to let it grab it from Windows updates, and then you can kind of flip the switch when you're ready. If you have a larger environment or managing things through System Center, you would actually push it out through System Center and kind of control it through the Windows 10 delivery mechanisms and servicing models through there. So you have additional ways to actually push this to an organization with more infrastructure in place. So a few additional scenarios are actually supported. They've been upgrading this process for a long time, but you can actually switch from BIOS to UEFI if you use a specific tool. But essentially, yeah, it's trying to keep everything as is on that machine, so that when it comes out on the other end, it's still the same machine, just a Windows 10 frame. And a lot of the back-end coding for Windows 10, 7 to 10, especially on the driver side, remains the same. And if you are concerned about, compatibility issues, there's tools out there you can go and run that will take a look at all the known applications that you have and their compatibility issues across the board. So, if you have something very specific to your environment, I would utilize those tools to make sure that nothing goes wrong, or if there's any anticipated issues when you upgrade from 7 to 10, at least as far as those specific apps go. Before we talk about traditional deployments, I want to talk about that update portion. It's the same URL for all of this. So there's two tools built into the same website. So that URL is included down here under deploying Windows 10. But yeah, this first one is just the update tool. It will download and install. I already have these downloaded. And then I have this is the Windows 10. If you want to do a more traditional deployment, which I'll talk about in just a second. But let me get back to my desktop here. So this is the Update Assistant. It is very straightforward. It's not going to do anything because I am 100% updated at this point. I don't have anything to show you. If I was on an earlier version of Windows 10, it's going to go out, grab the latest build version, and help update me to that. Since I'm fully updated, there's nothing I can do there, so not a lot I can show you. However, when we talk about more traditional deployments, there are some things I can demo. If this is a Windows 7 machine, it's going to show you a bunch of information to say, hey, this is the upgrade process, download and install the files, next. It's going to sit there for about an hour, maybe two, and then go through the upgrade process. Again, not a ton to show, and it's really boring to watch. But that's kind of what you want in this scenario, right? You don't want a very complicated process, especially if you're rolling this out to a lot of users. But so that's the in-place upgrade portion, right? So obviously, everybody wants to know about a traditional wipe and load and how that works. So let's talk about it. Everything utilizes an existing Windows 7 or 8 key. How this works is built into the built into the TPM. Your OEM has put a key that can be inherited across reimages. This is in later versions of newer hardware, though, utilizing what's called UEFI type. The newer form of BIOSes, essentially. This key gets embedded and it can be inherited just by Windows because of its presence there. Prior to that, if it hasn't been embedded in the TPM or in the motherboard, you would actually have to put in a key. Now, this also comes into play when you have a retail key. So if you've purchased a retail offering for Windows 7, say via Amazon, via Ingram Micro, or whoever it may be, where you actually have a product key, during the installation process of Windows 10, you're able to put that same Windows 10 or 8 key back in, and it's going to authenticate the install for you. Once everything comes back up, you're going to have what's called a digital license. Let me see if I can bring mine up here so I can show everybody. So right now, because I am using an enterprise subscription, I am active through that, and then I'm also using a digital license, which is that inherited key that I was referring to. This is what needs to be there previously before CSP activations will work for this subscription portion up here. This digital license comes in a lot of different forms, but usually is from that embedded key and just comes inherited across natively. If not, that's tied to the retail key, which you would have to manually put in, but you should still be able to recycle your Windows 7 key. If you weren't a CSP customer and you tried to do this, you would still have your digital license, but it's not going to activate the digital license because you're not a qualified customer. So, how do you do that? How do you actually get Windows 10 so you can install it on a device? That's where the second tool from this website, did I lose it? Yeah, from here, where you can download this installation tool, will actually give you a copy of Windows so that you can push out. So if you take a look at the tool here, it's loading on my other monitor. I'll bring it over in just a second. Alright, it's setting things up right now, but via this media creation tool, I get this ISO file here of Windows 10 that I can use to install to all my devices. This is a full copies of Windows. It's essentially Windows 10 retail without a key. You can put it on a flash drive. You can use this in System Center. You can do whatever you pretty much need to do with it to re-image a device. You just don't have a key because you need to recycle the Windows 7 side. All the acceptable terms, hit next. And again, this isn't extremely interesting to watch. It's just a lot of loading windows and a lot of waiting. It's a pretty automated process that happens behind the scene once you kick it off. Upgrading this PC essentially runs this Windows Update Assistant. So it will just say I'm fully upgraded, but you can create the installation media if you just follow through. Talks about the different architectures. Probably just need 64-bit, English. We'll create an ISO file. Call it Windows 2. And it's going to go ahead and download Windows 10. Pretty straightforward, and then you have a ISO file you can write to a USB or launch through System Center. Yeah, that's about it on the how to get Windows 10 and deploy it side. Obviously, it's a lot similar to what you do in Windows 10. Or Windows 7, sorry. It's just a little bit different because of not needing that new key and everything. You don't actually have to go out and purchase what you would from a volume licensing center or new retail keys or things like that. On the back end, I haven't talked about any of that. This all happens inside of Office 365, right? So there's a license that's assigned to each user, and that is where the digital license under this activation window checks against. So you first get this digital license that is issued via the key inheritance, and then it checks against the active user license of whoever's logged in against the device to make sure that they're properly licensed in O365. If they are no longer licensed, this should become a pro version and no longer active, or at least no longer active under Enterprise. Yeah, any questions about that part before we kind of talk about how to make this simpler on the other end of getting your machines to Windows 10? Okay, so at this point we've talked about how to get Windows 10 and get the point to deploy it, get it out to your organization. Once it's out there, and once, so I should say that this is not for the in-place upgrade. The in-place upgrade is going to update things, keep things domain joined, essentially keep everything the way you have it. Users should get back their same profiles. It should be a very seamless in-place upgrade, right? When you do the wipe and reload, it's a bit different because it's a brand new device. It has no knowledge of your environment, and then you end up you have two different ways you can start managing them. You can manage them through your local Active Directory or through Azure AD. There's kind of a decision that needs to be made at this point to see if you're going to be using pure Azure AD or if you need a hybrid environment with your local AD still. Most cases you'll need a local AD, but you can go pure cloud AD if you know the requirements around it, especially if you have the whole M365 bundle. You can use Intune to replace all the management features that you're doing through group policy and other places. It just really depends on what type of management features you need and what your specific scenario is. But now you have this brand new device that's Windows 10 after you do a blank reload. The first screen that it comes up to is a menu selection for language. At that point in time, you have the ability to plug in a new USB that we'll talk about here in just a second, that will go through and configure the device to how you want it. You don't necessarily have to rely on manually configuring things, re-domain joining it, if you don't have System Center. If you have System Center, I would just automate it through task sequence to deploy this out. But then for just smaller organizations, you get what is called the Imaging Configuration Designer. The thing about this tool is it's built into Windows 10 ADK, which stands for the Assessment and Deployment Toolkit. So you can grab it from here. I included the link in the PowerPoint, but essentially you can download this version here, and you'll have to install it. But then you get a tool that's called Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer, which I will show everybody now. This tool ends up creating a USB file. I'm not even sure the file type off the top of my head, that you plug in post re-imaging or post traditional deployment, post wipe and load, that is going to run it through essentially a script of commands that you want it to do, like join it to your domain, add your network settings. I'll show you everything it can do here in just a second, but it automates that process so you don't have to go through and do it all yourself. So here, let's just start a new test project from scratch. So, typical when you set up a device, you have to give it a name. You can kind of build your own naming conventions, but there are a few things as far as wildcards you can put in. A good one that I've been working with is just like quick organization and then serial number. Seems to work pretty well for standard naming conventions. If you were to have a product key, if you have a VL key, like a Windows 10 volume license key or something like that, that you want to put in, or a Windows 10 volume license key, you can enter that in here and it'll use that key as part of the configuration process. Setting it up for shared use. A new one that I'm particularly happy about is removing pre-installed software. So this is particularly useful if somebody comes into your organization with a brand new Dell laptop from Best Buy and the thing's got Candy Crush on it and like 5 other things that you don't want. This is going to go out and try to actually remove some of that embedded software and that embedded bloatware that isn't useful for anybody, right? It just gets it off of there, so it's a streamlined machine instead of being, a retail machine. Hit next. Set up the network. So if you have a standard Wi-Fi that you want everybody to connect with, you can go ahead and embed the key in here and give the SSID. I remember mine. So here's kind of the bifurcation, right? Whether or not you're going to roll an Azure Active Directory, roll it in Azure AD, or create just a local admin. In most cases, you'd be joining it to your local AD, where you can put in a local domain user, and it's going to authenticate and join itself back to your local AD. If you're in Azure AD, you can actually set up so it'll enroll the devices automatically in Azure AD, and you do that through a security token that is generated here, and then again you can always create a local administrator account as kind of a backup entry if you want to do that. But yeah, you have to retrieve a token which will require you to authenticate to O365, and it'll give you a token that's good for so many days, I think 90. And then after that, you'd have to create a new provisioning package just because this token will have lapsed. For our purposes, let's just... one. If you had some network applications somewhere, say out on a server that you wanted to install, you could actually tell it to install that. And this is similar to Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, where if you've deployed through there and you want to set up a network type push, you can set it up that way so that when the device comes back up, you can install Chrome or whatever it might be from the network, and that way you don't have to actually install it yourself. Depending on if you have Intune or not, you wouldn't necessarily want to do this because you can just push out things through Intune, which would probably be a lot easier. But yeah, so if I had a network share out there, I could just navigate to it. It's going to try to run the installer from the network during this configuration process. Now it's going to want these. The tool's kind of finicky sometimes where it needs values if you've selected them. Otherwise, you have to delete and start over. So, and if you were actually going to do this in a real environment, you'd want to use a UNC path instead of a local network path. It might even throw an error when I try to do a local here. We'll see. Nope, we're good. If you have any certificates that you want to add, I shouldn't have done that. Okay, yeah. If you have any corporate certificates that you need to push out to devices, you can actually put them on this flash drive as well, and it'll write them to the machine, and then they can authenticate to RDS environments or whatever it may be that you need your certificates for. You can finish it up, create a package. Sets it up, and it is a runtime provisioning package. So you copy this to a flash drive, and then when you come to this very first screen that Windows boots to, you plug the flash drive in, and it's going to run through this script here. This is just the bare bones of what this tool can do. I just did the pre-configured settings, but if you look down here, there's actually this advanced editor. If you switch to advanced editor, you can't come back from it, but essentially if you wanted to change any one of the registry settings or OMA URI settings, you can actually change that through here. So you go in and you actually write a very customized policy for these devices if need be. It just depends on what you want to do. So, for instance, if I didn't want people to use the hotspot, I can actually come in here and disable it so that they can't connect to it, or turn the device into a hotspot. I guess I'm not 100% sure what that field does, but additional configurations can be done from here. And there's a lot of pre-configured ones, but then I know you can also write custom ones as well. So if you want to get very technical with things, you can set up custom OMA URI strings, and that will write to the device during this installation, or this configuration portion of it. But yeah, that is essentially how to automate the onboarding of your devices once they are Windows 10. Now, this isn't for in-place upgrade devices, right? Because they'll just be the same thing on the other side. But your traditional, your new wipe and loads can really benefit from utilizing this tool and these USB sticks.
Well, are those configurations that you save, are those things editable? Can I reopen it, modify a few things, and then save it?
Yep.
Or is it just...
The only thing you can't, so now that I've converted this to an advanced, it's always going to be an advanced, but if I come back in here to a recent project, yeah, it reopens all the save settings. And I don't know if you saw it, one of the last options was to password protect it, so you can actually password protect these files, because there will be domain credentials and things in them in the end, and also your certificates, so it is kind of a security vulnerability to have this thing floating around.
Yeah, so like that authentication key that gets generated, I could potentially just go in and refresh that thing on an existing config.
Yeah, you should just be able to reprovision the token. Go in and where it said get bulk token, just redo that, and it should recreate it.
And just save it. I'm good. Okay.
So yeah, that is Windows 10. I mean, there's a lot of things to do to prep, but it's also kind of different depending on each of your organizations. So it could be a very simple process. It could be a more involved process. Again, it really just depends on if you can go to an Azure AD environment in the end and get rid of your on-prem environment, or if you still need to maintain your on-prem environment and have a hybrid existence until you can fully move to Azure AD. Or, again, you can run it hybrid forever. It's completely sustainable, and it uses the most balanced resources, right? Because you're using your on-prem and the cloud to kind of to maximize both your offerings. But yeah, that was about it for what I had as far as presentations today. Does anyone have any questions about the tools we went over, or any other questions about Windows 10 in general? So I guess the one other question that always gets asked to me all the time is, I lost my key, how do I get it back? Well, two parts to that. One, if you have an OEM key, you don't need to get it back. It's still in your machine, it's still embedded, Windows can find it when it needs to. If you have a retail key, you may need to claim it, and if you do, there's a tool called Nearsoft that will do it. It's a free tool. The Windows key is actually stored in your registry as a binary value. So you can find the binary value quite easily if you go through the registry, but you have to change it out of binary into something you can read, and that's what Nearsoft does. So yep, that will extract your retail key, not your OEM key. Well, no, it will actually extract your OEM key, sorry. So if you do need your OEM key, you can use that as well. Your OEM should be on the machine somewhere, or like I said, embedded. So just a few house cleaning items, and then we'll open it up for total questions and answers. But last thing is just why Giga-Green, and trying to debate on what to call the slide, but we ended up with the gigafits. But yeah, so for 2018, anybody who purchases M365 for 25 users or more, we're bundling in 2 problem resolutions, so any break fix that may happen with it or issues deploying it, plus a yearly security review and activation, how to actually get to Windows 7 and 10. And anytime you buy EMS, which is part of M365, if you cover your users with it, we'll do a yearly security review and try to maximize how to use it. On the Azure side, every $4,000 that customers spend in a yearly commit, they get 1 resolution towards the Azure subscription, towards their Azure environment. And then on the education side, since things are a little bit marked a little bit differently, if they're in the 50 knowledge workers or higher, they kind of unlock the same bundles that we were talking about for other things. And then lastly, if you have an OVS agreement and you haven't moved to CSP, anything over the 100 FTE comes with problem resolutions. But that is what I have for the day, and feel free to ask any questions.
Hey, Will, on the Windows 10 thing, one of the things we've been messing with is how to deal with the pin feature. And after watching you go through that tool, the post deployment, the configuration tool, it makes me wonder if that thing could potentially allow you to do that type of customization of your install, modify that behavior specifically.
So the pin is kind of a unique thing, right? It is several different things as you're enrolling these devices. And what I mean by that is the pin is tied to the device, right? When it first starts out, before it's ever a corporate device, Windows Hello is part of the picture. Windows Hello is a total retail normal offer, right? Any Pro machine comes with Windows Hello, which is the biometrics, security features, alternate sign-in methods, essentially, right? After you enroll it and join it to Azure AD, you get what is called Windows Hello for Business. Essentially the same thing, but slightly different because of how it's managed and how it's deployed in an enterprise environment. It's more robust, but it does inherit the key from Windows Hello. So depending on where you're at is what version of Windows Hello you're using. Now, there's no great way to manage a key administratively because they don't want it. They don't want that to exist. They want it to be tied to individual users. Until recently, there wasn't even a way to force a pin reset on devices through Intune or anything like that. It's fairly new within the last 6 months, I believe, where you can force individuals to reset their pin. In the past, they had to go out and actually set it up themselves and go through the account settings to change the pin. So I don't know necessarily where this automation process helps with the pin because it's still going to want the individual user to set the pin in the end.
Yeah, so you're saying basically it's a user thing, not a Windows 10 install configuration thing.
Correct. And actually that first time Windows pops up and says, would you like to set up Windows Hello or something like that, you can skip through that, cancel it, exit out or whatever, and just bypass it until you get enrolled into Azure AD. And then if you have, usually through Intune, a pin minimum set, it's going to enforce it at that time and make you set it. And also if you have set a personal one, if it doesn't meet the requirements, it's going to make you change it at that point.
Yeah, it seems like it keeps coming back every time you reboot the machine. It comes back and wants you to establish a pin. Then you can skip it again, but it just keeps coming back.
Yeah, and it will, because it does want you to have one as an alternate method to log into the machine, but you should still be able to select which method you log in with on the lock screen. There should be an option for drop-down, unless something is saying you can't use those other options.
Yeah.
The concern that we have is maybe for shared devices that setting up a pin with the texting doesn't seem practical for a shared device.
Yeah, and in shared devices, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. You can still have people log in with their password, right? But it may ask them to then create a PIN, depending on how you have things locked down. But
yeah, that's basically what it does.
yeah, and in that situation, you can end up with several different users with pins to that machine. But then again, that pin is only good to that machine.
Right. Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 in that sense. It's like every machine you get on, you could potentially have to put a pin in. And for the most part, it's not a big issue because the machines tend to be per person. But in a school situation where you got like a lab or something, you got kids coming in and sitting down potentially at a different machine every day or whatever. So it's dragging them through this process that's really kind of non-value added at that point.
So depending on, and I know so we're talking in different ways, so to keep this more generalized, in a lab environment, you can push out a group policy that will disable Windows Hello for Business, which if they're locally domain joined and Azure AD joined, that should be enough so that the PIN doesn't come up anymore.
Gotcha.
In a non-hybrid environment and just an Azure AD environment, you would need Intune to actually enforce that change.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So yeah. So you need the MMD to be able to propagate that type of restriction or configuration.
Yep. So Intune is going to take place for group policy of your group policy. So anything in the registry that gets changed is going to get changed through Intune now, and that is a registry type setting.
Yep. Okay.
Any other questions? In that case, we'll probably wrap it up. Thanks for hanging out with us this afternoon. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And yeah, have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Yeah.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Will.